Welcome. My name is Eric Martineau, and this is my wife, Diane. We met about, over 30 years ago in the Marine Corps. I was a IT system security officer, and my wife was a Marine intelligence officer. So we've been around this security stuff for nearly 3 decades. Tonight, what I'd like to talk about in this webinar is the PCI DSS compliance, specifically starting with an overview. So that's what we're going to do now. So a quick little overview of the PCI DSS. In 2006, the card brands, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, etc., they all got together and they said, look, why do we have so many different standards for all of the merchants that want to use our cards? Why don't we just have one? So they decided to form the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council. And that council then created guidelines and requirements that all of the companies that wanted to use those cards that either accept, process, store, or transmit card data would then be held accountable for. And so what they created were guidelines and requirements. And those guidelines and requirements fell into what we now call the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS. The PCI standard that we're currently on today is version 3.2.1. And we're rolling into, in March of 2024, we're going to roll out the version 4.0. But today we're still at 3.2.1. Now when 4.0 rolls out, not everything will be obligated to us immediately. Some of it won't have to be rolled out until actually March of 2025. But for today, what we're going to go over is the foundation that we're currently working on, which is version 3.2.1. So what does the PCI requirement cover? It ensures the security and protection of cardholder data for anybody that, as I said, accepts, processes, stores, or transmits cardholder data. So let's go over the objectives that were put in place for the PCI DSS. So the first objective that they laid out was to protect cardholder data. And we can do that through encryption. We can do that through access controls. In other words, who has access to touch data, network security, and then also safeguarding sensitive information. Another objective, the second, was to reduce risk of data breaches. And we can do that through secure transmission of cardholder data. We can also do it through secure storage of cardholder data. And we can do it by segmenting out that which is the public network from the company's private network, from within the company's private network, having an environment that we call the cardholder data environment. A third objective was to ensure secure card transactions, thus implementing secure processes and technologies for anyone that, again, accepts, processes, stores, or transmits cardholder data. The fourth objective was to show compliance with industry regulations. That's what we're trying to get, that PCI DSS check mark, right? So PCI, the card brands require this. In other words, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, Diners, etc. And one of the main objectives of the Card Industry Council was to maintain public trust. So PCI DSS compliance increases customer trust by demonstrating a commitment to protecting sensitive card payment information, whether that's on the internet or when you walk into a store. And the sixth objective was to provide a framework for the best practices. Like I said, this is because all of the card brands got together and they said, look, let's put together one framework that everybody can use. And so this is a comprehensive, standardized security framework that establishes and maintains a secure environment for handling cardholder data. So who needs PCI DSS? Well, basically anyone who touches cardholder transactions. And this includes merchants, so the auto mechanic or the website that you go to buy something, right? The acquirer, and this is the merchant's bank. So your mechanic, the bank, the credit union that your mechanic is using, he or she, their bank becomes the acquirer, okay? And then service providers. Now these will be companies that provide service to your mechanic, right? So obviously, well, not obviously, but probably obviously, your mechanic doesn't have an IT staff that's writing secure code so that when you take a payment, he takes a payment for fixing your car, that everything's taken care of, right? Securely. Well, there are service providers out there that will provide your mechanic with services for secure transmission of data. Also, we have payment processors. Now, service providers, there are many. Payment processors is one subset of service providers, and they provide, again, secure services to merchants so that when you do go into your mechanic and you use their point of sale machine, or you go onto somebody's website that just provides candles and they have no idea, they don't have a development team of software engineers that know how to write code, they're going out to a payment processor and getting the software from them. Okay? And then we've also got the issuer banks. And these are the people that actually give you and I, as individuals, a card that we can then go and use in any of these merchants' locations. So let's define those a little bit better. One of the first ones would then be merchants. Anyone, any entity that accepts Visa, MasterCard, American Express, any of those cards, anyone that accepts those cards for payments of goods or services is considered a merchant. Now, a merchant has a threshold of responsibility to make sure that your cardholder data is kept safe. Your mechanic probably doesn't have any developers writing software. So your mechanic probably has a limited amount of exposure. Whereas, say, an Amazon website, where Amazon does have thousands of programmers, they do take on that responsibility. So you've got the gamut between, say, your mechanic that has no IT staff and is just outsourcing their processing as a merchant, to somebody like Amazon that takes thousands and thousands of card transactions per minute. Okay. Another one is called the acquirer. Now, the acquirer is the merchant's bank. This is the company that your mechanic is working with. So if it's your mechanic, it's probably the local, I don't know, credit union or something like that, right? So that credit union becomes the acquirer in this process for your mechanic or merchant. And then the acquirer, they have even more responsibility to make sure that your mechanic, the merchant, is actually keeping things safe. So they have added responsibility as the acquirer. They're the ones that are really policing the merchant to make sure that the merchant is doing what they should be doing. Okay, then we have service providers. Now, service providers are any company that provide merchants with services that might impact cardholder data. And there are many of them. So you have payment processors, we have payment gateways, we have managed security services, we also have point of sale machines that you just run your card through, hosting providers. So Amazon might be hosting your website that's there. But Amazon Web Servers may be providing the service to that candle merchant that you're buying candles from, right? Okay. And then you've got e-commerce platforms also. All of those fall under the rubric of service provider. So let's talk about payment processors. They are a subset of service providers that provide a service for those, like I said, the mechanic that doesn't have an IT staff that's writing code for secure transmission of your data. What they can be involved in are things like encrypting the data, transmitting the data, settling funds between the merchant and the issuing banks. That's what a payment processor is going to do. And usually for smaller merchants, this is outsourced, right? So that's who's doing it for the smaller merchants. Now, the issuer bank. So the issuer bank is the financial institution that issues the card to me. So again, in my case, Wells Fargo, Citibank, who I have cards with, right? So it's the cardholder's bank. The issuer bank is responsible for monitoring cardholder accounts for potential fraud. They also then authorize the payments as they come through. But it is the issuer bank that makes that determination as to whether or not Eric has enough funds in his account or the cardholder has enough funds in their account to pay for that transaction. So what does the transaction flow look like now that we've defined the major players? Well, the first one is the card holder, and they go into a merchant. And I'll just continue to use the mechanic as my example, right? So I go in to get my muffler fixed, and my mechanic fixes the muffler, and I come in and I say, how much was it? And they say $160. And so I swipe my card. That card then, as I said, is probably going over to a payment processor because my mechanic hasn't put together what's needed for encrypting that data with strong cryptography, which is what we call it. So it's the payment processor that has the software that then provides the strong cryptography to take my card from swiping it at that mechanic's location and having that information traverse the internet to get over to the merchant's bank or acquirer bank. So think about this for a second here. From a PCI DSS auditing standpoint, I like this little cartoon, but no need for data safety if you've got nothing to protect. So, you know, your mechanic probably has, although there are still requirements that the mechanic has to adhere to because they are accepting credit cards as a merchant, their burden of proving that that card transaction was done safely probably falls more into the hands of the payment processor. So the merchant is really eliminating some of their responsibilities that a larger one wouldn't. So like Amazon, not a chance. They have all of that in-house, and so they're doing it. So anyhow, the next step. Now that card holder data is sent in a secured fashion through the internet over to, as I said, our mechanic's bank, the acquirer bank, the merchant's bank, where it's probably traversed through the internet, and it did it safely because it had strong encryption. It gets to the acquirer bank. The acquirer bank now has the 16 digits from the credit card and the other information that comes on it. And they want to go find out if I, the guy trying to pay for the muffler, have enough money in there. So what they do is then send that information on to the payment brand network. Now this is a network that, again, those payment brands, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, etc., have all gotten together, and they have a network where they send off the information that's associated with that card, and we'll get more in depth into what that is, but they send off that information to the payment brand network. And this payment brand network now has to figure out if it's a Visa or a MasterCard or what have you, okay? And then they end up sending it to the issuer bank, my bank, to find out with Wells Fargo or Citi, whichever the two Visas that I've used, find out whether or not Eric has enough funds. And then when they figure that out, they then will approve or reject my purchase and then send that information back through the payment brand network, back to the acquiring bank, through the processor, the payment processor's software, back to the merchant, and finally tell the merchant whether or not my transaction was approved. And then when that happens, bingo, I get to walk away with my muffler, right? So I get my product. And as soon as I find out what I bought, the next day somebody will tell me I could have got it cheaper someplace else. Buyer's remorse. It sucks. Just kidding. All right. The PCI DSS framework has 6 goals and 12 requirements. Let's go through the 6 goals first. The first goal, build and maintain secure network systems. The second goal is to protect cardholder data. The third goal is to maintain vulnerability management programs. The fourth one is to implement strong access control measures. Who can get at the data and who can't. We're going to go through all of these in depth, by the way. The fifth goal, regularly monitor and test your networks. Prove that they're still safe. And then 6, maintain an information security policy. Documentation. Okay, those are the 6 goals. Those 6 goals are paired with 12 requirements. So the first goal, to build and maintain a secure network system, has 2 regulations. The first one deals with having secure firewalls. So if you're trying to memorize some of this, first one is secure firewalls. How to block access from the cardholder data environment with clear rules for both inbound and outbound traffic. I'm going to hit that one a number of times in here, and I think that's a very important thing to remember. The largest risk you have is not a Ukrainian hacker or a Russian hacker getting into your system. It's probably a disgruntled employee who can get in. But then the question is, if they can get in because they had authority, are they able to send anything out? And not if you've locked down traffic for outbound. Okay, so it's very important. This is both clear rules for inbound and outbound traffic. Number 2, no defaults. If you're going to memorize 2 words, no defaults. This means no default users, no default accounts, and no default passwords. Every computer that you buy, every router that you buy is going to show up with defaults. And no, you cannot use them. So that default admin as a username, you got to change it. If your network is called Godzilla, then admin Godzilla. That's okay, but not just admin. Does that make sense? So requirement number 2, no defaults. The second goal, protect cardholder data, again has 2 requirements, requirements 3 and 4. The third requirement is to protect stored data. So if you're going to, again, memorize something short, it's protect stored data. That's what requirement 3 is about. So we're going to talk about truncating, hashing, tokenizing, or encrypting your data. We're also going to talk about encryption key management. So when do these keys expire, and when they expire, how do we deal with them, etc. Who are the custodians? Also, we're going to talk about business needs for storage. Back to that little thing I showed a minute ago where it says, if you don't have anything to store, then you don't have an issue. And that's the case here. So is there really a business need to be storing people's credit cards? And if not, don't store it. Then what can be stored and what can't be stored? This is going to be defined also in the third requirement. And finally, once we no longer have a business need for that data, how do we purge it? How do we make sure that it's actually wiped off of the hard drives that we had, etc.? Okay? And then requirement 4 is to protect transmitted data. While it's moving, as I said, from the mechanic's office, right, or mechanic's shop over to his or her bank, which happens to be the local credit union. Well, it's going to go through the internet to get there. How do we protect that data as it's moving? Well, with strong cryptography. And we're going to define what strong cryptography means in requirement 4. And then what about Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or cell phones? You go into Olive Garden or Chili's and they've got that payment machine sitting right there on your desk, and there's no wires. You can pick it up, flip it around. There's no wires. It's wireless. Well, when you run your card right there at the table, who's to say that somebody sitting out in the parking lot that also is catching that Wi-Fi signal isn't doing something nefarious with your card data? How are they making sure that that is protected? And that's some of the things that we're going to talk about by protecting your data during transmission. And that starts with the card swipe, whether that be at your mechanic's office or at Chili's. It doesn't matter what restaurant you're in, what merchant you're with, they have to protect that. The third goal, vulnerability management program. And this covers requirements 5 and 6. Again, there are 2 requirements under this goal of vulnerability management. The first one is antivirus, anti-malware software. Okay, and we're going to discuss here then, how is antivirus software maintained? How often do I have to run antivirus scans, right? And then, do the users have the ability to disable it? What if it's my laptop at home that I'm getting back into a corporate network with because the corporate network needs me because I'm an essential database administrator, but I don't have a corporate laptop at the house? Am I able to disable the firewall when I'm out surfing the net for tennis shoes online? Questions that have to be answered here. Requirement 6, securing systems, software applications. And that's whether it's a software application that you've bought off the shelf and you need to update it with patches as vulnerabilities are found out there in the internet, or this is also going to deal with your own in-house development team. So if you've got programmers inside of your company, it's going to talk about how to write code properly. So you're going to rank your vulnerabilities in-house, again, whether it's software that you have purchased or software that you've developed, and then you're going to apply vendor patches to the stuff that you've bought off the shelf, right? And then how do you get your developers to write secure code? How often do you need to train them? right? So this is another issue. And as it says there, there's another big issue between where can the developers actually play as though they're playing with a new, if they're, let's say they're writing a web application for your company, right? Where do they get to play as though that website's actually up and they're working on it versus your live environment? And those two have to be separate. So it's going to discuss that too. And then how do you do secure development? Like I said, how often do your developers have to be trained on secure development techniques? And then the change control processes. Development rolls something out to operations. It goes through QA. Operations rolls it out onto the actual web environment, to the website for the company, right? And something's broken. Can developers just jump in and fix it because they need to? I don't think so. So there has to be real change control processes for all of the applications that you're playing with. And again, all of that, what I'm saying about developers also holds true with software that you've bought off the shelf. So you have to update patches and things of that nature. And that was what we're going to talk about in requirement 6. So again, threats and vulnerabilities of web applications is another thing we're going to be looking at under requirement 6, a vulnerability management program. All right, the fourth goal is strong access controls. Now this one has 3 requirements, 7 through 9. Number 7, business need to know. So who has access to make changes to your firewalls or your routers or your network in general? I remember this one coming home to me when I became a young lieutenant, and I had an office of different staff, and I had a networking department, and I went to make to get to know the sergeant that was in charge of that network. And I said, so do I get passwords? He said, sir, are you going to be configuring the routers and the firewalls to keep them secure? Now, I'd had the training when I went through my officer program to be an IT officer, right? I knew how to do that. I just left the school. But was it really my job? No, it wasn't my job. I was an officer and I had other things to do besides actually making that network hum and sing. And so that sergeant rightly understood that I didn't have a need to be getting into those routers, even though I was, quote unquote, his boss. And so that's what it means by a business need to know. Why? Because of the principle of least privilege. The fewer people that can modify the network, the routers, the firewalls, the fewer odds are that somebody is going to get disgruntled and change them. So, or just mess something up and cause a vulnerability. So we need to define those roles. And in that organization as a Marine, there was only a few people that had the right to go in and monkey with the routers, the firewalls, etc. So you define those roles. And then restrict access and deny all to everyone else. So again, even though I was the boss in charge of the network department in the Marine Corps at that time as a lieutenant, a little lieutenant, but I had no business need to be doing it. So I was denied the ability to get in and change routers or firewalls, even though it was my quote unquote department. All right, requirement number 8, identify and authenticate. Every single user needs their own ID. That way you know who got in and did something. So you don't give out IDs based on roles, you give out IDs based on individuals. Now, the roles those individuals have can give them certain permissions, but everybody in that role has their own unique, okay? Timeframes. When somebody leaves your unit in the Marine Corps, when somebody quits or is fired or terminated in the civilian world, right? How quickly do you allow them to continue having access, and how quickly do you take that away? So what are the time frames? How about for inactivity? If I walk away from my laptop, how long can I walk away from my laptop before it automatically locks the screen? Passwords. How long can I keep that password, right? And then lockout duration. If I try and attempt on my password 6 times and it doesn't work, how long should I be locked out? This is what requirement 8 is going to talk about. Multi-factor authentication, something that you know you are or that you have, like on my phone, right? I'm going to have, they're going to send me that multi-factor authentication code from Facebook or Google or whoever it is. That's multi-factor authentication. So something that you receive, that you have, something that you know, or something that you are, like a fingerprint or something, or a retina scan. That's what multi-factor authentication is. And then remote access. How do we deal with remote access? Employees have to keep networks up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they don't work but 8 hours a day or 12 hours a day or whatever that is. But we've got them on call 24/7. So what happens when they need to get in from a remote area or another pandemic hits and they have to work from home anyhow? All right, that's number 8. Number 9, requirement number 9 is physical access. Before we've been talking about digital access, now we're talking about physical access. So cameras, videos, network jacks. When visitors come to your company, are they able to just plug into the same jacks that everybody else gets when they go into the visitor lounge? How about ID badges? Do they look the same as the company's ID badges? Wireless access points. That's one way a lot of people get ripped off. If all you have to do is drive into a parking spot at an organization and get onto their Wi-Fi, like I was saying, you're having dinner at Chili's and you're swiping your payment card, and if somebody's sitting out in the parking lot, which is only 8 or 10 feet away from your corner desk at the Chili's restaurant, if they get a hold of your data, what kind of security was that? So we're going to talk about wireless access points. Physical media storage. Once you've put cardholder data onto a hard drive, how do you get rid of it, right? Tampering with equipment. So let's say that mechanic, right, that I was talking about has a point of sale machine. Okay, well, how do we make sure that doesn't have something, it hasn't been tampered with, so that information is no longer going to the mechanic's merchant bank, the acquirer, but instead it's going to a nefarious person. So those are other things that we have to talk about, is tampering with equipment. All right, regularly monitor and test networks. This is the 5th goal, and it encompasses requirements 10 and 11. Requirement 10, track and monitor networks. Again, your quick little simple thing to remember, track and monitor networks. When and which events should be logged? That's one of the questions that we have to answer here. Also, which system components need to be logged? How long are logs kept, right? Of all the things that are taking place on that network, how long do we have to keep that in place so that we can go back and look to see if somebody broke in? The average hack in America lasts about 400 days. So over a year, if hackers get in, they're in doing whatever they want for over a year. So we need to keep logs for a while. And then how do we synchronize events? How do we make sure that the clocks on all the different pieces of equipment are synchronized so we know where a hacker came in and how they traversed our network in a timely, knowing with timestamps where they began and where they went to. Requirement 11, test regularly. How do you know that your environment is always safe? One of the ways is to actually do testing. So regularly, you need to test your systems and the networks. Requirement 11 is going to give us the specifics on what we need to do there. Inventory all wireless access points. I think it goes without saying with my silly little example, and I apologize to anybody from Chili's or Olive Garden for saying somebody's sitting out in the parking lot stealing their data. I'm sure they're secure, but you get the idea. How do you know? You don't see anybody plugged in, right? If a visitor comes in and plugs into the wall jack, people see that. But what happens when they just log into a wireless access point? So how are you going to inventory the wireless access points that have access to cardholder data? Perform internal and external vulnerability scans, speaking specifically about wireless especially, okay? So how do we know that people aren't able to get in? Because again, you're not going to see them necessarily. All right, and finally, number 6. Goal number 6 is to maintain an information security policy. Underscore policy, which would indicate documentation, all right? This, I think, is probably one of the most important parts of the PCI DSS. And that's because this is where upper management, this is where other departments, because if you think about it, like I said about that Marine that I worked with, the sergeant, that politely said to me, sir, even though this is your department, do you really need to be configuring routers? Do I need to have you on that list? No, that's not my responsibility. I'll let you do that kind of thing, right? But we need to document those policies so that we know why people are getting into our network, why they have access, and is there a business need? And so we need to document all of this so that upper management understands. Again, those different silos in a business environment. And I know I used an example of a Marine, but the young man or woman that's working on your router's configuration. They have no right to go traipsing over to the marketing department and tell the vice president of marketing what he or she can do or can't do with their applications, right? It's much easier for the vice president of security or IT to go and talk to his or her counterpart in that other organization and say, do you guys really need that software anymore? Because we can no longer get patches for it, and that's creating a vulnerability for us. So we need to maintain these policies and document it so we can justify why certain applications, certain ports, etc. have access. All right. Number 12, formal InfoSec at all levels. Establish, publish, maintain, and train on InfoSec. And this is something that has to be done for everybody all the time. So we need to establish, publish, maintain, and train InfoSecurity across the board. Risk assessment process. There has to be a formal risk assessment process inside of our organization. So every time we update or change something, we need to go through that risk assessment process. Clarify, define information security responsibilities. Everyone in the organization needs to understand, as that sergeant said to me, sir, are you really going to be changing things? No, I'm not. Okay, I don't need router configuration abilities. So clearly define the responsibilities, who has them, and what they're going to be doing. And then also, very important in today's world, have an incident response plan. So if somebody does break in to the network, right? You are capable, your organization is capable of knowing, hey, I've got to call the FBI if this happens, or whatever it is. But there needs to be an incident response plan. Again, all of this needs to be documented. All right, this is the introduction, again, to PCI DSS. There are 6 goals listed there, and then there are 12 requirements that go along with those goals. And we'll go more in depth into every single one of them now moving forward. That was just the introduction. So thank you for coming to the introduction, and I hope that your time in learning about PCI DSS is profitable.